Today we want to talk about psychotropic drugs and black boys. One of the biggest problems we have in the African community today in America is a prevalence of young black males taking dangerous psychotropic drugs that can lead to all sorts of problems, from premature death from overdose to things as small as overeating, oversleeping, undereating, or undersleeping. In order to understand why psychotropic drugs have become the treatment of choice to deal with hyperactivity and emotional problems in black boys, you have to have an understanding of the eugenics movement in America. The eugenics movement was started by a white racist psychologist by the name of Francis Galton, cousin to Charles Darwin. And Francis Galton actually was considered the father of the study of individual differences in psychology. He, along with others, gave birth to the eugenics movement, which is nothing but racial science, or should we call it racially biased science. The eugenics movement has roots in America that are long, strong, and deep. In fact, Hitler's campaign to exterminate the Jews, the ideology of that campaign was actually borrowed from American eugenicists. It's important to know that half of all the states in this country, more than half, had mandatory sterilization laws in effect for African people whose IQ test scores were not past a certain point. So to make a long story short, if you was misdiagnosed with mental retardation on a racially biased middle-class IQ test, then you could have been forbidden to ever have children, and your natural ability to do so would have been taken away from you. The same thing that Adolf Hitler did to Africans and Jews in Germany. Now, to trace the immediate history of the psychotropic drug movement against black boys, we can go back to 1980. The Federal Anti-Violence Initiative sparked the beginning of the psychotropic drug movement against black boys. In 1980, the United States government, through certain bureaucratic agencies and professional and pseudoscientific agencies, began studying the impact of psychotropic drug use on not only black boys, but the entire black community. In fact, Peter Goodwin, who was one of the government's top psychiatrists at the time, who was a racist, used to compare black boys to jungle monkeys. And he basically said, in so many words, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if you want to control the behavior and emotions of black boys, then you're going to have to give them pills, because just like animals, they are unable to control their behavior and their emotions. So that led to the study of a gene in black males that predisposed them to commit violence. If you go back to the 80s, even going up into the 90s, you know that there was a lot of studies being done across this country that was looking for a gene in black men that predisposed them to commit violence. Eugenics, racial science, trying to blame problems that were caused by racism, oppression, and inequality on natural biological tendencies. And basically, what happened was, as a result of these studies, we then saw the birth of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the birth of oppositional defiant disorder, the birth of conduct disorder, the birth of disruptive behavior disorder not otherwise specified, which is a label that you give the black boys when the other criteria for the other three diagnoses I just named are not fully met. Collectively, these four diagnoses represent a category of psychiatric disturbances called disruptive behavior disorders. Now, scientifically, there's only two treatments of choice for a child diagnosed with a disruptive behavior disorder. Number one, there's behavioral psychology. That is the strict application of consequences and rewards to change behavior. I actually am a supporter of behavioral psychology as used to deal with disruptive behavior. It doesn't require medicine. It requires adults to be responsibly involved in a child's life, i.e. parents and teachers, to teach them how to control themselves by strict application of consequences and rewards. The other treatment is drugs. Dangerous psychotropic drugs. Drugs that up until the year 2000, many of which were not even allowed to be given to children. But because of the power of the psychotropic drug industrial complex and the influence that they have on government and the Food and Drug Administration, at the turn of this century, they were allowed to start using dangerous drugs designed for use on adults, on childhood populations. So now you can give a child a drug that wasn't even designed for their usage. Now you do have new drugs that have come out in the past 10 years that were designed specifically for children. But even these drugs have very, very dangerous, long-lasting, and permanent psychological and neurological consequences. For example, most of these drugs impair liver, kidney, heart function. Most of these drugs kill brain cells on contact. Most of these drugs can lead to your child developing schizophrenic tendencies, hallucinations and delusional disorders, tics, premature death, diabetes, and all sorts of other disorders. Most importantly, from a eugenic standpoint, what black parents are never told is that most of these drugs can lead to your son losing his ability to procreate, to have children in adulthood because of the brain damage that these drugs exert on the natural reproductive organs of the black boy. In other words, it can destroy his ability to produce healthy semen in his testicles. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we giving boys dangerous drugs that can kill, that do not heal, just so they can sit still long enough to be miseducated? The psychotropic drug movement is the greatest serious threat to quality of life for black men in America. The interesting thing about the psychotropic drug movement is that it can lead to an increase in the same symptoms that these drugs are designed to heal. For example, a drug that is taken to reduce hyperactivity can cause hyperactivity. A drug that is taken to stabilize mood can cause an increase in mood disturbance. In fact, some professionals, some mental health scientists, some of my colleagues have suggested that the rise in black-on-black male violence can at least partially, not totally of course, because there's a lot of other variables involved in that, but the rise in black adolescent and young adult male violence can at least be partially traced to and blamed upon the use of psychotropic drugs, many of which have been linked directly to an increase in homicide and suicide. The interesting thing is that whenever studies or reports come out about the relationship between psychotropic drugs and suicide and homicide, they almost always deal exclusively with non-African people. In other words, it's safe to say that Ritalin or Paxil or Prozac or Cyclert or Adderall, it's safe to say that they lead to violence and homicide in white people, but it's not safe to say that they lead to homicide and violence in black people. Because what we have to understand is that you yourself, by yourself, all alone, are supposed to be totally responsible for your own predicament.